The Better Business Analysis Institute
presents the Better Business Analysis podcast with
Benjamin Walsh.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Better Business Analysis podcast with Benjamin Walsh. And I apologize for my voice. I have been down with COVID for the last week, but we're going to continue on our BA Bytes series. And today we are going to follow through 10 top tips for writing awesome user stories. So if you follow me on LinkedIn or you are, one of my, friends on there, you will see that the Better Business Analysis Institute published a white paper called User Stories 2.0. And we're going to get to that in number 10. But we're going to count down 10 top tips. These are really important. I dip into this subject a lot, and I think any BA, doesn't matter if you're senior or junior or getting started, will get value from today's session around writing effective user stories, which is critical. And it's critical because it ensures that the delivery team, the development team, are building stuff, features, deliverables, improving processes that actually deliver real value. And real value is not just a buzzword. It actually means something the customer cares about. So we're going to walk through 10 top tips for writing awesome user stories with examples, focusing on clarity, actionable details, and connecting user stories to the broader business process. We'll also introduce the User Stories 2.0 concept, which the Institute has published, and I'd love to get your feedback on that. So let's dive in with number one. Number one is keep the story focused on user value or customer value. Ensure that the story is centered on the user's needs and the value they will receive. They receive a value item, okay? User stories should not be about technical tasks. Okay, there's a lot of people out there who write user stories to talk about what they're going to do. No, it's not about technical tasks, but about delivering things, features, if you like, that solve user problems or provide benefits. I'll give you an example. As a customer, I want to see recommended products based on my previous purchases so that I can quickly find items that match my preferences. A lot of e-commerce sites do this, okay? And of course, there's acceptance criteria under that. You can put in the description or the acceptance criteria field, which will be recommendations should be personalized based on my previous purchases within the last 6 months. So you're introducing a bit of a business rule there, some constraints around the user story. The recommended product should appear on the home page when the user logs in. So this is description of the user story. This is the comic book. So when you write your user story, one of the best ways to make sure you've covered it off is draw a little comic book strip. Okay, if you're from the world of user stories and not use cases and traditional business analysis, visualize how you think this will become true, and some of those additional points will become description, acceptance criteria in your user story. It's number one, keep the story focused on user value. Number two is be specific with the desired outcome. Clearly define the outcome or benefit the user should be experiencing. Vague goals lead to misunderstanding about what should be built. Okay, and this really focuses on the so that I aspect of the user story. So here we go. As a project manager, I want to receive email alerts when tasks are overdue so that I can follow up with team members to avoid project delays. Lots of people could have written so that I receive an alert, or so I am notified. They just rewrite the I want to in the so that I. This is an easy problem. Don't do it, is my advice. If you catch yourself doing it, and sometimes you do it because you're rapidly writing these things, go back and change them, okay? So you need to think about why is that feature, why is that function important to the person? And it's usually not a technical reason. And so in this case, it was actually so they could follow up. Okay, this is really important. It links to so many other aspects of product management and why you create value and viable alternatives. And when things are tough and you need to prioritize, then the why is all that matters. Okay, and so again, you can have acceptance criteria. Alerts must be sent when a task is more than 24 hours old. The task alert should include the task name, assignee, due date, and so forth. So that's really around number 2, which is be specific with the desired outcome. Number 3 is really important, and I'm going to talk about breaking down in more detail here. Break down user stories, or stories is a general term, into small manageable chunks. That's the whole point of the agile cycle and sprints. So large stories, epics, are hard to implement in a single sprint. That's the purpose of breaking them down. So there's 2 reasons. One is this side, from the delivery side, that they're too big. But they're also a great starter, as I said, to link to traditional business analysis and real business analysis, if you like, of capturing high-level requirements first. But you do need to break them down into smaller, more manageable user stories that can be completed within a sprint. And so you could break these down again into child user stories. So you might, and a child user story might supersede the previous user story. So you can either have children, or you can archive and just have smaller, more user stories, if you like. So I'll give you an example. For a large area like, I don't know, managing my orders, you could break that down into smaller stories. As a customer, I want to view my order history. So it's a sub function of managing my order. Okay, so that I can track past purchases. Or you might have, as a customer, I want to update my shipping address before the order is shipped out. So these are all sub-features. And again, you can visualize this. If you draw up what you think is a conceptual version of an order screen, this really helps. This is not cheating. Some people think you bring up pen and paper. It's like, oh, you're starting to develop. You're starting to design. Well, you're just conceptually thinking about it. You should be doing this as a VA. Draw a picture and go, oh, what's on an order screen? Or look at your order screens. You're like, well, they want to be able to view their order history, don't they? And update their shipping address. And so this is all part of it. This is all part of the analysis and design in the sense of business analysis. So you do that and you go, okay, well, we've got this massive epic around managing my order. We're going to manage my order screen. But actually now we've got some subcomponents, if you like. They will be components by the developer's side. And from your point of view, they're functions that need to be performed. Okay, they're user stories. And you can break them down even further. So if, for example, you got to a point where you're like, view my order history, and the order history screen was massive, that's where you could say, look, I really want them to not just view the order history, I want them to be able to view specific details of their previous orders, right? So like go back in time, see what was delivered, when it was delivered, and all the rest of it. So that could be another user story. So you get into the order history, and it's come from the product owner, they've spoken to customers, and they want to track past purchases, and you find out it's a bit more than you thought it was going to be. It wasn't just the name of the order and the item, it was like when it was delivered and some metadata around the order. So that's a child user story of that particular user story, or you could just create a new one, add it to backlog and say, look, we're going to implement this version of it, my order history, as this user story first, and then it's going to be my order history details view, or advanced details. We'll chuck that on the backlog, and that's not going to be done this sprint. That's what we mean by breaking this down. They all contribute to the epic, which was manage my order. Does that make sense? but there's a relationship between view my order history and this new view my order history, details. And that there could be linked as a child user story or just simply put on the backlog at the kind of same level. I like to use child user stories, and that's why I would break it down. Okay. But it wouldn't be implemented in that sprint. It doesn't mean that the children are all done in the same sprint. Okay. Let's move on to number 4. Add clear acceptance criteria. So just to be clear about acceptance criteria define how the story will be validated. Okay. And this helps the developers, the testers, and stakeholders know when the user story is done. So the definition of done, how do they know? And how do they know it's working as expected? So the acceptance criteria is not a well, by the way, defined area, and it's something that I'm quite interested in wrapping some guidance around. But it's been increasingly used to fill the gap of, say, documents that have business rules in them. So I'll give you an example. So as a user, I want to reset my password via email. Okay, it's quite interesting. It's got via email. So you're now specifying with what channel, with what. Okay, so we'll come back to that. So that I can regain access to my account if I forget my password. Very standard user story. It's one of these user stories that you sometimes forget to chuck into your app because you just assume the developer's going to do all this. I know I've done that before. And the acceptance criteria under this user story is that the user can request a password reset by entering their email. Okay. So that's different. It's more descriptive. It's saying that they have to enter the email. So that if you like, you could break this user story down into further user stories around having a field or an area where a user can type their email address, a valid email address. Can you see how you could break this down into other user stories? But in this case, the acceptance criteria is enough for the developer to visualize what they're going to build, and they've recognized this pattern. So I would say there would be less value in writing another user story or child user stories here. But the first acceptance criteria is around by entering their email. And the second one is a reset link is sent within 5 minutes of the request. Okay, you set your email address, you click reset password, and then within 5 minutes, the request should be sent back. And there's some importance about that. I mean, you could say instantly, and then that can involve huge amounts of tests. I happen to know, because I've got a bit of a development background, that it will be queued, this request, and it might not be possible if everyone's resetting their password. It's not really a priority job. So 5 minutes is pretty standard. Or I don't actually say a couple of minutes these days people would expect an email reset, or they'll go back and reset it again. And then the last acceptance criteria, number 3, is the reset link will expire after 24 hours. So it's around security and making sure that it's not forever or hackers can't gain access to it. So they're all what I'd call business rules that you're applying in the acceptance criteria, and they all have to be true. So that allows the user story, ultimately the resetting happens, and you've specified some rules around how it has to happen. Number 5 is so important. User stories, you get so wrapped up in your epics, your user stories, product features, all the rest of it. Don't forget about non-functional requirements. Most projects that encounter big disasters when they go live is because the BA and the team and the architect haven't thought about non-functional requirements or done a good enough job. They are overlooked. They are critical. They are critical not just for your reputation, but for user satisfaction. So we just talked about before around there was this resetting option. What would happen if we hadn't specified a time? Or worried about performance of this particular resetting of password, or even security. Okay, so we For example, when we reset the password, we sent the old password in the URL. That would be a security problem, a non-functional requirement we should have to make sure that doesn't happen. And that would cause a security risk, and actually people would be able to just, instead of resetting the link, they could just take the old password, enter and get into your account. So you need to think about things from a non-functional side. And there's usually templates. I've got lots of good content about non-functional, so I'm not going to go on about the point, but I'll give you an example here. As a user, I want the system to respond quickly when searching for products so that I can find items without delays. And this will stop me from going to other websites. And so the acceptance criteria could be search results must appear within 2 seconds of 90% of queries. The system should handle up to 10,000 concurrent search requests. So these are all non-functionals around the interaction with the system in order for the features, functions to operate correctly, securely, performance, scalable, usable. And this includes things like content and web standards as well. So they all come under non-functional requirements. So do not forget about non-functional requirements. Number 6 is, and I actually had this conversation with someone a couple of weeks ago, focus on one persona per story. Don't have a group of personas. Think about the individual persona, individual user that you're focusing on. User stories should cater to a specific type of user or persona. Trying to address multiple personas in a story creates confusion. And it's really talking about the individual persona. So as a system administrator, I want to manage permissions in the control panel so that I can control access to different parts of the system. And then in the acceptance criteria, you might say something around admins can view a list of items, they can grant or revoke access to specific modules. Now, that's around the system user, system administrator. And that's a good example because it's around the people that you sometimes forget about, especially when you're building a system, that you think, oh, we haven't built an area where the system administrator can actually control permissions. We've just got a user who has a credential, okay, and just gets allocated a role. But someone has to manage that. So that's thinking about the individuals in the life cycle, your stakeholders that are managing the system, as well as interacting with it, okay? They all are important, and we need to think about them as individual personas. So yes, and it should be unique there. And sometimes, just as a top tip, sometimes that can be a bit of a reply. So early day business analysis and system design, you would do like a sequence diagram, for example, sometimes, or you would do a use case diagram. And so think about a baton approach. And what I mean by that is, look, as a user, I want to be able to view a list of products on the site so I can browse and decide which product I want to purchase. And then, so I'm doing that. Now, what is the response? Does anyone need to do that? Does the system need to do something at that point? As a system, I want to respond to searches for products within a timely minute. So the baton meaning that I've done my thing, now I want the system to do something. And if you think about it that way, again, like a comic book, but with all the characters, including the system as a character, you won't miss all the user stories. Number 7, make the user story testable. And so we do that by doing great acceptance criteria. But we also need to write our user story in a way that testers can validate whether or not it works as expected. So an example might be, as a subscriber, I want to be able to cancel my subscription from the account setting page so that I can stop being billed if I no longer need the service. And then in the acceptance criteria, you might have the user can navigate to the account settings and see a cancel subscription button. Clicking the button triggers a confirmation response, calculation is processed, and the user is notified by email. That completes the whole actual comic book, the story side of the user story. They need to be testable. So make sure that you're writing something that can actually be tested. If it's not, then you may need to reword your user story. And they're not all, for example, numbers or counts. Could just be binary. Does it work? Does it not? Number 8 is prioritize your user stories by business value, not by development preference, not by what you think is the most important, but what the user, the customer, the business thinks is the most important. This ensures that the team is always working on the highest impact items and features. So, for example, as a customer, I want to be able to track my order in real time so that I know exactly when it will be delivered. Now, that's an example there where a user wants to know when they want to track my order. Now, let's say there's another user story, which is as a user, I want to be able to view where my order is at, okay? So that I know when it will be delivered, or I get some idea about when it's going to be delivered. So the fact that we have 2 user stories, one which is just around to be able to track my order, but more light, and the other one's around tracking in real time, which might be a should have requirement. The business value might be just to implement the tracking order first, and then you will do the real time tracking at a next sprint if it's deemed highest value. So you need to prioritize these things. I would suggest that a trick to even realizing whether or not a user story is the most valuable is that it allows the user to complete their journey, their job to be done. So they're able to complete their full cycle. So you should focus on them being able to perform a step. Okay. Just yes or no, can they complete that step, tracking their order or viewing their order or checking out before you start to work on user stories, which aren't MVP. And what that means is before you start adding additional features to other areas. Number 9 is never done well here, and that is consider dependencies between stories. Sometimes one user story cannot be fully implemented without completing another. Okay, like I said, there might be a user journey, so that's literally the journey of the customer to get from A to B. That's important. Your storyboard should show that. But also in delivery, there might be some dependencies that ensure smooth delivery. So, for example, let's say as a customer, I want to pay using PayPal so that I can complete my purchase using my preferred payment method. That's a pretty common user story here. And there will be some acceptance criteria that go under that. But what we might realize is that someone's working on that. They're building a screen. They've got the PayPal logo. They've designed it really nicely. They've given the user option. But there was no point in doing that user story because I haven't completed, as a system, I want to be able to integrate with PayPal to provide PayPal payments. So the PayPal integration must be completed before implementing this story. So you don't just focus, you do focus on the user value from the storyboard point of view and what's the sequence, but ultimately you also need the development team to think about what user stories need to be done in what sequence. So for example, you can't offer paying by PayPal to a customer, which is high value, if you haven't done PayPal integration. So there are sequences that you just need to focus on. And so that's using dependencies, prerequisites. That would be fantastic. And you can do that in tools like Jira and DevOps. And number 10. Number 10 is to adopt User Stories 2.0 to include triggers and entities. So to address gaps in traditional user stories, you can adopt User Stories 2.0, which adds 2 critical components. With User Stories 2.0, what we've introduced here at the Better Business Analysis Institute is both with trigger, okay? So that allows us to know what entity are we affecting. This could ultimately end up being a feature in your development. So it's an output, a page, an area. So that is, but entity is a really good way of looking at it. So it's like with car or wheel, okay, a conceptual entity that you may have drawn up. And we introduce a when, a trigger, a condition. So that allows us to talk about timing and what needs to be true. Now, this won't necessarily replace all the business rules that you have in your acceptance criteria, but it will give you the main reason for why and when and with this user story functions around. So this is the format that we use. As a persona, I want to, right, perform function, desired feature, whatever it is, so that user value goal, when trigger condition with entity being affected. So let's work through a really good example here. As a customer, I want to manage my email subscriptions so that I can choose which email I receive when. My account is activated, okay, and managed with the account setting page. So if you're a BA working on detailed user stories, you should be in the development team. They're talking about how they're going to design it, and you already know conceptually there might be an email settings page. You should have drawn that up probably conceptually. And you're thinking about it, you say, well, I want them to manage their subscriptions in this area. So why don't you be more explicit when you're in the detailed planning phase, you're in the sprint, and you talk about, well, where do you want this to happen? So that means the developer now knows, and you may have drawn a picture of this, that that's where this function should take place. So they're not building a whole other area, or they're not guessing. So you're being really explicit. You've visualized that this would be a setting in the account setting area, okay, around managing your email subscriptions. So that makes things really explicit. So with User Stories 2.0, you're adding the when and you're adding the with. And in this case, when was just the fact that you had an account. Okay, it wouldn't be for customers who weren't logged in or for customers who hadn't signed up yet. So it was when they had an active account. So that again talks about security. It gives quite a lot around the both the state of the account, and of course it might just be any time they want to do it. And whenever I choose to update my subscriptions, and the with again links it back to the architecture, to the actual reality of the fact there's a component which needs to be built, which is your account settings area. So have a read of the white paper around User Stories 2.0. It isn't perfect, but what it allows us to do is bring in some of the things we lost from use cases, which aren't used that often, and business rules and process, and starts to really allow you to incorporate all the thinking that you have done as a BA into the user story, so it doesn't just get lost. So the other thing, of course, is adding visuals to this and pointing to this. This really helps, linking back to mock-ups and a process diagram around when do you allow them to do this. So this feature, for example, which is around being able to update your subscription preferences, your email subscription can happen kind of whenever throughout your kind of managing account, your account lifecycle. And other examples, there will be specific time periods when things need to happen. Like, I don't know, the 30th of every month, send an email to someone. Okay, so you can see the timing there. And so that will link it to your process diagram and to your mock-ups, and it means that your user stories are full and complete. So there are 10 top tips to make your user stories awesome. I hope you got value. Apologize for my voice today, and I'll see you next week.